and welcome back to Your Next Episode podcast. I'm Louise Daniels, and this week I'm solo hosting as Amy's away, and I'm so thrilled to be talking to Dr Nighat Arif at her home. Hello, Nighat.
Hello.
Hi. Nighat is an NHS and private GP with a specialist interest in women's health, and you've probably seen her on television on BBC Breakfast and also heard her on BBC Radio. I've been following her on social media for about 9 months, and I know how highly regarded she is by other professionals and also by the women she supports on social media and in her practice. Today we're going to initially focus on the experience of menopause in ethnic minority communities. But first, Nighat, can you talk us through your work in 2019, which I think was quite a big year for you, and the people you've collaborated with to support women around the menopause and also in your community?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on your
welcome.
podcast. It's an absolute honour. I'm genuinely chuffed that you've come to see me because I feel I'm a bit of a wanderer. 2019 actually turned out to be a really chaotic and hectic year, all in a good way. Wake Up to the Menopause happened with BBC Breakfast, led by Louise Mitcham, because she opened up her story. And I think that was so significant and paramount importance for so many women because it allowed the conversation to start. But actually, I'd been working with in and around midlife medical issues with women in my own community in Cheshire, where I live, speaking to the Pakistani women in their own language, because I'm fluent in Punjabi and Urdu. And it was speaking to those women that I realised that a lot of the symptoms from the aunties, and I say that in quotation marks because when you're Pakistani, everybody's your auntie, they would come up to me at the mosque, in Sainsbury's, in youth centres and say, Nighat, I've got all these symptoms. I've got no memory. I've got tiredness and I'm really fatigued. Everything aches. So they will say, Sar se leke pair tak. That means from my head to my toes, doctor, everything hurts. And I would say to them, oh, do you know what? I'm not too sure what this is, but go back to your GP and maybe they'll help you. But all these symptoms were hodgepodge symptoms. They'd almost come and go. And then I'll see them at a next event and they'll be like, oh, it's gone now. Those hot flushes aren't there anymore. The physical symptoms were the ones that they would come to speak to me about. I would very rarely get any symptoms about mood or feeling upset or tearful or anxious. Those were symptoms that would never come. And it was actually then I had a family friend who had complained of aches and pains. She'd been misdiagnosed as having fibromyalgia or diagnosed as having fibromyalgia, put on high dose steroids, and she went out to put some clothes on the line. She fell and had a fractured neck of femur, wheelchair bound. Oh. And it was then that I realised that actually what she was telling me was the menopause. Those were menopausal symptoms. Now, I do the menopause at work. As a women's health expert, this is what I deal with. But it wasn't hot flushes that she ever told me. It was more of these banal hodgepodge type symptoms that were coming and going. Then she'd be all right again. For decades, she would tell me this. Discussing periods was something that I could never talk about.
You couldn't talk about it, not because you didn't want to talk about it, but because they would find that very uncomfortable.
Because it's still a subject that is very taboo, very hidden. It's something that actually not most women will volunteer about at all, to say, oh, I have heavy periods or I don't have periods. And it's actually when then I sat down with a lot of my mum's friends and I said to them, oh, you know, the symptoms that you're describing, they could be menopausal. And they all laughed and giggled and said, oh no, but we like the menopause. We don't have periods anymore. I can go to the mosque and pray and I can go to weddings and, you know, do all the rituals that I want to do. It's a happy event. We have menopause parties. Woo. And so it was, on the one hand, it was a celebration. And then on the other hand, it was, well, this is something that we don't suffer with. It's a Caucasian problem or a white woman's problem. And I say that in quotation marks, and I apologise if that's very derogatory. No. But that is what was in the community as an issue. Yeah. And then I realised, actually, oh my goodness, because they believe this isn't something that happens to them, we're missing them, we're misdiagnosing these women, and they're getting the completely wrong end of the stick. So women aren't going to their GP and saying, I have these symptoms, I think it's the menopause. And on the other hand, there are doctors who aren't trained in the menopause, And they are missing them and doing a whole battery of unnecessary tests, possibly giving her antidepressants because they think it's depression, and having this misnomer, this is, an Asian lady head to toe pain, because we see that. Or sometimes it's diagnosed as miscellaneous pain or pain of unknown origin.
Right.
And that's not how we should be dealing with the community at all. So that work led on to doing some talk shows at BBC Three Counties Radio. I then got involved with Diane Dansbrick because we met again on the radio initially because we were talking about the menopause, and I was trying to explain to people that HRT isn't the devil that people think it is.
No.
The research behind that is flawed. And what we need to do is look at that research in a practical way, because the WHO study that was done over a decade ago said, do not take HRT. It will give you breast cancer. It will give you clots. But that was a flawed bit of research.
Yes, yeah.
But nobody picked up at that.
No.
And you know about that now.
I think so. Back in August, it was still being, like things like the Daily Mail were putting headlines, really scary headlines out. And then, people like yourself, Diane Dansbrick, Louise Newson, Liz Earle were saying, no, that research was flawed. But when people just see it as a headline, they kind of go, well, that's it. It's going to give me breast cancer.
And those headlines really work, because it's like the clickbait, sensationalized headlines. And when you look at that, you really do think, oh, gosh, I don't want to get this. And there were lots of people coming forward saying, I've got breast cancer. So celebs were coming forward. Women were suffering with menopausal symptoms, but yet not wanting to take the treatment. And that was studies based on a synthetic form of HRT given to women over the age of 60. Stopped halfway. The study wasn't a randomized control study, and they didn't actually look at what were the risks of these women having breast cancer anyway, because 1 in 8 women are a risk of having breast cancer, and they are not even on HRT. In fact, obesity is the biggest cause of breast cancer, far, far more than HRT. Yeah. But this seeped through within the ethnic minority communities as well, because GPs like myself, and I'll hold my hand up to this, I was a young doctor then, having information from the Department of Health, the GMC, the Medicines Regulation Authority saying, do not prescribe HRT because these are all the risks. Or if I did want to prescribe it for a patient, I would get all these flashes on our computer system going, are you sure you want to prescribe this? And when you're a young doctor, it gets really nerve-wracking and really scary. So I actively used to do medication reviews and then counsel a woman and take her off HRT. It was when I saw Dr. Louise Newson doing a talk over at the Oxford Women's Health Conference that I thought I really need to go, because there was a lacking in my education and a lacking of my own knowledge, because those women that I had taken off HRT would come back with worsening symptoms, suicidal symptoms, because we forget that actually being sleep deprived, depressed, anxious all the time, memory fog, losing yourself, irritability, your marriage breaks down, you can't have sex because your libido's gone. That really, really impacts a woman's life to the point where she is suicidal and she thinks, well, what am I doing? This is completely
life's
not even... life's not even worth living.
Not worth living, no.
And that really made me incredibly sad as a doctor. That's not why I trained to be a doctor, to do that. The NICE guidance had come about at that time that said, because they revised all the guidelines, they looked at it again, went to Louise Newson's talk and she said, HRT is okay. HRT has moved on leaps and bounds by then. We've now got transdermal, so patches or a gel.
Can I just ask what made you go to her talk? Because the impression I'm getting, I know GPs give their basic training, there's very little time spent on the menopause, but you specialise in women's health. Was that because it was a personal interest to you? That's why you went along?
I was really lucky in my training. Within your training to become a GP, you do different specialities and you spend some time with them. I was really lucky. I did get women's health. So I got gynecology for 6 months. So I did everything from doing maternity checks, delivering babies, emergency C-sections, dealing with miscarriages, all the way up to infertility problems, and then the menopause on the other side as well, prolapses, etc. So I was really lucky. And then I was in a practice where I had a very proactive trainer, Dr. Vivian Carter, who was very pro HRT. until the guidance came about that actually we shouldn't be prescribing it. And then we all got very muddled as junior doctors.
Very confusing, yeah.
Very confusing. And I can only imagine how confusing it is for women on the other end of it. But also it's because when I was speaking to ladies at the mosque in my communities, I realised that they were really embarrassed to talk about women's health, and we don't have the words. So for me to be able to have the language skill, I could cross two barriers.
Yeah.
I could teach them how to actually go and speak to the doctor who doesn't speak Punjabi or Urdu to ask what they are suffering with, because we don't have those language skills entirely. I mean, in fact, periods, we now use the word periods within the Punjabi language, but there's no common term for periods. In Punjabi, it's known as kapde, which means like having a rag or being on the rag. It's similar to that. Or they say menses. Right. And if you're slightly more educated in Urdu, they will use the English word. So we substitute a lot of English words into our own language. But if you've got somebody who's authentically from a village in Pakistan who comes over here through marriage, they're not going to have those skills at all.
No.
And also because it's sexualized. So the minute you have a women's health problem, even if it's, my breasts are tender, that's such a sexualized subject. If you sexualize something, you put it into a box and you don't talk about it, because we're very conservative, and you don't talk about something that means that you spill out into the open your private business. And unfortunately still, I think within my community, and maybe as a culture in the whole in the UK, the minute a woman starts to talk about gynecological problem and it becomes sexualized, then you start thinking that the woman is promiscuous. Women shy away from talking about sex because they don't want people to think that she's either enjoying it or having too much of it, or not having enough.
No, I know
all these sort of issues come about because I see it within Caucasian women, Afro-Caribbean women, Japanese women. They don't want to talk about it because it's almost seen like, oh no, we don't do sex.
Yes. So going back to the language barrier, in 2019, can you talk us through some of the other projects that you did relating to that?
Well, I actually got in touch with Jane Lewis, so the author of My Menopausal Vagina, the brilliant Jane. She's fantastic.
She's wonderful.
Jane said to me, I'm doing this leaflet on vaginal dryness, vaginal atrophy, and it's something that is really taboo. And I said, oh my gosh, this is so taboo. And I see it a lot in my surgeries, and mainly I see 60, 70-year-olds who will use, for example, on the back of a different consultation, they'll suss me out and then realise that they feel comfortable enough to show me their vagina and show me that they're itching at night and having all these terrible urinary symptoms. And that's how that conversation comes. And I said, it'd be brilliant if we could have this translated. And she goes, that'd be awesome. If you could translate this into Urdu, that'd be brilliant. So Jane and her husband put this leaflet together, which was overlooked by Diane and Dr. Louise Newson.
Yeah.
And she handed it over to me and I said, yeah, give me some time. Let me see what I can do with it. I can translate it into Urdu, if that's okay. My husband speaks fluently in Urdu. He's from Pakistan, and he looked at this. There's a big picture of the vulva on the leaflet. And he just went, okay, do I have to translate the vulva and everything around all the anatomy? And I said, don't worry, we can somehow get somebody else to help us with it, because I needed to learn all the words. And there are no words. I mean, we just use English substitutions for it. Got this leaflet translated, and then Elizabeth Ellis, Karen Kenning and Claire Shepherd, so the Positivity Girls, Know Your Menopause, who'd got together after the Wake Up to the Menopause campaign at BBC Breakfast, contacted me and said, we'd be grateful if you could translate our poster into Urdu, because we are trying to aim to get this all over practices and gyms and hairdressers, so women can look at this and say, oh, actually these hodgepodge type symptoms that I'm getting, maybe I can join the dots and this is the menopause. And that again has gone global with the leaflet that Jane Lewis has done. That's gone global as well, and it's really opened up this conversation, and it's more inclusive this way. You're looking at all the diversity as well, and doing those little projects just feeds into the bigger aim, which is we do want more knowledge and empowerment behind how menopause is dealt with at the GP level, because GPs can deal with this really easily. But making sure it's on the curriculum, making sure that people at school, so Diane already has achieved her campaign to get it into schools, and then obviously the workplace as well. So if we can get literature like this up. So that's where it came back to doing all these little projects in 2019. And it was really going back to the language that we use, because mostly, I don't know what your experience is, Louise. When people talk about the menopause, it's almost derogatory, or that she has a bit of hot flushes, isn't it?
Yes.
Or, you know, all right, darling, don't get into a twist because your mood swings might come back again.
Absolutely.
And it's seen as a joke.
Yeah.
But it's not a joke.
No.
It doesn't have to be that way.
No. And it's the not talking about it. You know, that's how I came to, you know, want to start sort of looking into talking about it more, like in the podcast, for example, because I, for about a year, had symptoms. I just thought perhaps, I actually self-diagnosed myself. I thought perhaps I've got some sort of cancer, or maybe I'm getting early onset dementia. Perhaps I'm suffering from depression because of all of those symptoms and I just thought your periods stop and you get hot flushes and that's that. So
that's a really relevant point, because that's frightening. If you are feeling those symptoms and you think I've got cancer,
I know,
that is so frightening. And do you know what the thing is that just as you were saying about you making excuses, or it could be this, it could be this is exactly the same thing I'm experiencing with my Pakistani ladies, because I'll say to them, but the reason that you're possibly feeling like this is perimenopausal, because you can get symptoms as young as 40, and that's the other thing that really throws people off, because it must be that I have to stop my periods. Actually, no, you will still have regular periods.
Well, that's what I was thinking,
but have the symptoms. Periods,
but
in my culture, it's still practice to look after your children, and then you look after your parents.
Right.
And there's still, within the community that I live with, the cultural norm is for arranged marriages. And most of the times, a lot of these perimenopausal type symptoms will come about when they are in the midst of trying to look after their elderly parents. The children are probably leaving, you know, the nest and going off to university and getting more independent. Mothers then are panicking about how am I going to marry my daughter off, and how's my son going to behave.
There's a lot going on anyway.
And so when I speak to women, they will almost dismiss the symptoms straight away and think, oh no, it's not the menopause, I'm 40, I'm still having periods, this is because I'm worried about my daughter's arranged marriage, or I've got to look for her rishta, or I've got to do this. And we do, as women, we don't think about the hormonal imbalances. We instantly think, or on the other flip scenario is that women don't put themselves first.
No,
they will put up with it. And I'm always flabbergasted how much women will put up with before they come and sit down with the doctor. And if the doctor is able to, firstly, on the NHS, have more than 10 minutes, give them the time. And luckily, a lot of my colleagues are incredibly hardworking, and we will take the time to put it all together, is then we say, well, this is the diagnosis. But then on top of that, if you've got the hierarchy of the professional body saying, do not give the treatment to the woman.
Oh, I know, yes. So,
do you see where we are? We're in this vicious cycle.
Yeah. And just actually having conversations, that's what needs to happen.
That's exactly what we need.
You know,
This is why Louise Mitchum talking about it was really powerful, because having one person who says, God, I lost myself and I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and be in front of the TV, and actually all I want to do is have a meltdown. And she was so honest and so brave. That just gave a lot of voices to a lot of women to say, I feel like this. And on the flip side, the amazing amount of response from men. I would get so many men who would come and see me afterwards, after I was on BBC Breakfast, saying to me, thank you for talking about it, because it gave my wife almost clarity of what she was feeling. So I'll tell you this really sweet story, because I think when I did my interview, I spoke Punjabi on the sofa, and a dear family friend of mine stopped me in the street and said, Nighat, when you were on the sofa, we were having a cup of tea, and my wife was in the kitchen washing the dishes, etc. She heard you speak Punjabi, which is never done on BBC Breakfast.
No.
Nobody speaks Punjabi on the show. She stopped. She ran into the living room and watched you, and she just started crying. And she goes, oh my God, it's the menopause. This is why I feel so rubbish. And she'd been suffering with perimenopausal symptoms, depression, anxiety, terrible insomnia, for sort of years on and off, and hadn't really spoken to anybody about it, but just suffered in silence.
So can I ask, is there any work being done within the NHS to address these issues? And what else needs to happen?
There's so much work being done at the minute,
Good.
Louise, and all for the right reasons as well. Because of figureheads and campaigners like Diane Dansbrook, Dr Louise Newson, Jane Lewis, Katie Taylor, the Positivity Girls, and also Meg Matthews as well, because they're using all these platforms to be able to openly talk about it. And I just think little bits of information are coming out, and that's just adding to it. And thank goodness for the world of social media, because that means we can get more and more information out. And on the NHS front, NHS England are really keen to make the NHS website that a lot of people do turn to for advice as the best and the most robust website in order to provide evidence-based clinical advice and where to go to. And the Royal College of GPs are working with Dr Louise Newson in order to provide care and also training modules for doctors. And they are trying to look at how they can incorporate that into the curriculum. So I do think that baby steps, small steps, but it's going to happen because we need it to happen. And it takes small steps to make waves, and I would say we're going to make tsunamis.
Oh yes,
and this is just going to get bigger and bigger because it is hopefully 2020 is going to be the year of the women. Well, it's going to be more and more powerful women coming forward, and this is this is the best way in order to get more education out there.
So you talked about the NHS making their website the real go-to place for clear evidence-based information, and so for women from ethnic communities to get information and support, would you say, yes, the NHS website is the best place for them to go? Yeah.
We have to make sure that we have a standardised body that is backing that up with the nice guidance. That was one real way of allowing doctors to say, yes, you can prescribe HRT. This is the different types of HRT that's available. And as Diane has often said, menopause can become the new black. So you've got to be really careful because people do then use it as an opportunity to possibly make a bit of money. I talk about the menopause and everything for free, like yourself. It's more about getting information out there that's clear and also empowering women to be able to talk about it. So it's trying to make sure that it's clinically evidence-based and ethnic minority communities equally can turn to NHS website. And hopefully in the future with more better translation services coming in, if we can, that's even better.
I'd also like to ask you about organ donation today, specifically in regard to ethnic minority groups. I'm going to ask you to tell us your story in a second and Kasim's story. But I was really surprised by the figures. I just want to check I've got these right. So in 2018, just 8% of deceased donors were from Black, Asian or minority ethnic groups. And 31% of those waiting for an organ are from those groups. And I know that Kasim waited longer for his liver transplant that he needed because you're from an ethnic minority, longer than your white counterparts would have done. First of all, can you tell us your story, or Kasim's story? So
Kasim is our middle child because now I've got 3 boys. Baby Adam has been running around here somewhere. When he was born, he was actually completely fine and healthy. He was about 3 weeks old. It was almost like night and day. I woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning to give him, I was breastfeeding him, to give him some milk. And he just looked yellow to me. And you didn't know whether it's sleep deprivation and you're just exhausted. I was a mum with 2 children. The oldest was 4 at the time. I had lots of doctor friends who would come round to the house and they would all look at him and they'd say, oh, don't worry, Nighat, it's okay. It's breast milk jaundice. It's because you're breastfeeding him and this is exactly what happens. But something wasn't right because after a couple more days, his urine became really dark and his poo became really pale. And that's when your doctor instinct kicks in because you think this isn't something that's normal. I took him to my local GP practice and said to, which was a locum GP, and said, please, can we just get a blood test organised because I'm not happy. Had a blood test and that evening got a phone call from King's College Hospital, which is the paediatric transplant liver unit. And they said to me, we're going to book an emergency transport for you from Stoke Mandeville Hospital, which is our local hospital. Your son has chronic liver disease and his liver's not working anymore. He was 3 weeks old.
And you just told that over the phone?
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm really practical and I'm really pragmatic about things. And instantly I just thought, that's okay, because I'm a medic. I know how the liver works. I'm sure it's one of those resilient, forgiving organs. We could correct it and it gets better and he'll be back to normal before you know it. I'm not knowing that this will ever lead even to a longer pathway of possibly transplant. Went into hospital. They stopped me breastfeeding him. They checked him for viruses. I think the hardest thing was not breastfeeding him because I was in agony. Because when someone tells you I was engorged. It was horrible. And I found that such a struggle physically. That took its physical toll on me, as well as a mental worry that my baby is really poorly. He had a liver biopsy and we met with a professor. And he said to me that he has this rare condition called bile export protein pump deficiency, which means that he can't get rid of his bile salts and they're just in his liver, knocking off his liver cells. And every single time the liver tries to regenerate or reheal itself, mistakes are happening. We'll try and give him some medicine so that he can get rid of these bile salts in the meantime. But he could go into organ failure. And he could possibly die. So he was about 6 weeks old by that time. And I'm sat there going, oh my God. The world just stopped. Yeah. Because me and my husband, we just sort of looked at each other going, what? I want to swear, but I won't swear. But what do we do now? I mean, this was such a awaited baby. Our eldest was 4. He was desperate for a baby brother or a baby sister. We had our baby that we wanted, but yet he was poorly. What does this do with our work? How are we going to earn if one of us is looking after a poorly child? And also, again, being practical, I was thinking he needs a transplant. So I said to the surgeons at the King's unit, test me, test us, we will donate. And they said it's not as easy as that, because we firstly don't do a lot of live donations in this country. So from a living person to another living person. And we'll need to take half of your liver. But you've got a dependent at home. You have a 4-year-old. And I think the statistics at the time they said to me was 1 in 200, so chance of death. And you look at that and you think, what? Because at the time, I think the statistic was for breast cancer, if I can just put it into a bit of context, was 1 in 800. And how often do we hear about breast cancer?
Yeah, I know.
So this was even more.
That's
scary. So they said, no, we'll wait and we'll put you on the transplant list. But just be wary that you're from a Pakistani ethnic minority group, and we don't get a lot of donors from ethnic minorities at all. And so you might be waiting a little bit longer. And I said, really? And I mean, I'd never been aware of organ donation. I'd been, as a junior doctor, aware of my seniors counselling family members after sort of a terrible road accident and approaching the family in that terrible dark time, saying to them, will you be willing to donate? And the family making that decision. But that was my only exposure to it. It had never been something on my radar. And also, as a Muslim, as a Pakistani, from within my Pakistani community, it's not something we ever talked about or was on our radar. And I just believed that it was against my religion. So is that the reason then? Is it a confusion over religious guidance? I think nail on the head there. Yeah. It's the confusion around the religious guidance.
Because as I understand it, there's no confusion around accepting a donor, but there is confusion about giving your organs.
So within the scriptures, if you look at them, and this is from my understanding, is that we believe that as Muslims, our body is a gift from Allah. And to our best intentions, we have to try and give that gift back when we die for the afterlife. As intact as possible. And therefore, when we die, those organs are right. Well, that's what the belief is.
Right.
But also in medicine, in Islam, we consider death as death if your heart stops beating. But in medicine, your heart will still be beating if you have a brainstem death. So if your brain is dead, but your heart's still beating, in Islam, that's not considered death.
Right.
So historically, in order to retrieve organs, your heart still needed to beat in order to perfuse the organs.
It's really complicated. It is quite complex then, yeah.
Very complex, because you need those organs to be perfused enough with enough fresh, rich blood, healthy enough. You need to make sure that decay doesn't happen to those organs. But how can you keep that going if the heart's not beating?
Yeah.
And if the heart's still beating, then in Islam, you're not dead.
No.
So you are
Right, okay,
technically not dead and giving your organs away. Well, that doesn't fit well with the theory that your body is a gift and you've got to return that back intact. So we had to then go back to the scriptures. So in April 2019, the British Sunni Council released a fatwa because pioneering individuals like Amjad Ali, Mufti Zubair Butt, they all got together, they looked at the scriptures again, because it doesn't sit well with a lot of Muslims that how can we accept an organ but not be able to reciprocate that act, that great act of humanity. And that doesn't sit well with a lot of Muslims' belief of what Islam preaches, because Islam is all about humanity and peace and looking after your community and your neighbour as much as possible. So there was this misnomer, this mismatch that was happening. But we know that through a lot of research and science and also transplant has come such a long way. But now you can actually retrieve organs such as stem cells, tissue types, certain organs after the heart has stopped beating, which makes it permissible in Islam to donate. There's this amazing piece on ITV News where actually this consultant in Newcastle was able to retrieve a heart, put it onto machines, keep it beating on machines, and then donate that into a living organ.
Wow.
See, that now the heart isn't in the body beating, but it's outside the body, and therefore a Muslim person can donate.
Yes.
It all comes down to personal choice.
Yeah. But also, back to what we were talking about initially, about opening up discussions and getting some understanding.
Yes.
Like you say, it comes down to personal choice, but people need the opportunity to be able to make a decision and a choice in an informed way, rather than just like, oh, well, that's what I think the scriptures say.
And what we need to do is, exactly as you say, be open and have those difficult conversations, because nobody likes talking about death. Nobody likes talking about what they want to do with their body after they're gone, regardless of faith and those with no faith, regardless of your cultural background.
But that's a shame as well. I think that's turning death into something that we're all very scared of. And, yes.
I think that if you look at social media, mainstream media, it's all about the living, and youth is still so much more prized. And, if you're just over the age of 30, that's it, you're downhill.
Imagine being 50.
You're still gorgeous, Louise. You're still gorgeous. all those difficult conversations, if they don't happen, it means that actually knowledge gaps happen within a community, which is exactly where I was. I mean, I'm a doctor and I work within the NHS, and I had this knowledge gap with my faith. Where does it sit? But then my journey taught me actually I'm waiting longer than my white counterpart. So if I just give you the statistics at the time, 1,800 people waited on the organ donor register in 2018. 1 in 5 will die just waiting.
Just waiting, yeah.
And actually, when you think about the people that die in this country who are healthy, and we've got a national register that's set up and a retrieval team that is set up in order to harvest organs as well, to save lives, we're really not using that service appropriately. And also because we're not having those conversations. So Kasim waited and waited until he was about 10 months old. But that wait,
I can't imagine.
It was the worst thing that I find it really hard to talk about now, because otherwise I start crying.
No, I know. It's making my eyes smart thinking about it.
It's the worst way. But do you know, at the time I was still working.
Yeah.
I was looking after my 4-year-old. I was looking after Kasim with all his medical checks. And for some reason, you just function and you go through it. But also, every single time, if a phone rang with no caller ID, I'd pick it up thinking it's the hospital telling me to come in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he then collapsed at home because he couldn't retain his sugars anymore because his liver had got so bad. And then they did a few more tests, and he was going into multi-organ failure. And everyone kept saying to me, it must be so much easier being a doctor with a child that needs a transplant. It was difficult, because sometimes I knew the conversations that the doctors wanted to talk to me about before they even happened. And I just remember absolutely petrified that they would start palliative discussions with me. how do I palliate a 10-month-old?
Yeah. No.
How do I take him home and watch him die?
Yeah.
When I knew that he needed this transplant, when I know what the treatment is as well, but we're just waiting. But then they're so worried. So it got to a critical 24-hour period. And I was like, do you know what? You take anything, take whatever you need, because you get to that point as a parent. And I was a match with him. And because we'd sort of had those conversations leading up to it, because I was just getting desperate. They found that he had liver cancer. And that's why he was right on the critical list in the National Register. And then this miracle happened. I got a phone call. This is sort of at 2:00 in the morning, saying, "We've got a match for your son." It's not a complete match. The donor is O positive, so it's universal. Kasim is B positive. But because it's a universal donor, he'll match with Kasim. We'll make sure that we transfuse some plasma cells, make sure that he takes on the host organ, and we'll centrifuge his blood so that we can try and make sure there's very little rejection. Because then the other whole, you get a transplant and you get that precious organ, but what if the body rejects it? So you've got to think about all of that.
Yeah.
And you go through the motions. And it was only when I got him home, because it took him 6 months to recover from his transplant. This little 10-month-old had his transplant. He spent his first birthday in hospital, attached to machines. And it was 6 months down the line that I was just washing dishes and I couldn't stop crying.
Well, because that was
because it hit me. It just hit me like a train, because I just thought, oh my God. And do you know, the reason I was crying was because of what we'd been through. And the other thing I was crying for was the loss that this mother had experienced. Because it's bittersweet.
The organ donor.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that was another child.
That was another.
Little boy
so they didn't tell me the details, because it's an anonymous system. So you don't know about you'll never know. You'll never get to know them, because it's meant to be an altruistic act. So there's no sharing of money or kindness or, just saying thank you to somebody. And some parents aren't ready to even talk about it. But they do give you some information, because I was insistent. I wanted to write a letter of thanks, and then they'll look at it and they'll cut out any identifiable information and then pass it on, because it's done through a mediatory transplant team. Right. And they told me that it was a young boy. So in my head, you almost romanticize it a little bit and think it's somewhere between the age of 8 and about 14. He was on his bike, fell off his bike, hit the back of his neck, and died, unfortunately, and had a brainstem injury. And it was in hospital when they asked the parents that would you be willing to donate? And apparently that was the first time that the family had ever thought about organ donation. They said, yeah, we've got this little baby that's waiting at King's College Hospital. He needs a liver. Would you be willing to donate your child's organ? And this is what gets me. I have no idea how those parents found that courage to say yes. Like, how do you then, at that time, because, it's finite, you've got to do it quickly in order to get the healthiest organs.
So is it a point before maybe you've accepted there is no hope of your child? Was he died?
Yeah, so
he had died.
He was on a machine.
Okay.
But he had brainstem injury, so he had a complete head injury. So they kept him on a machine to keep his heart going.
But that's a decision they've got to make very quickly, isn't it?
Yeah. How do you do that?
I know.
Like how did that family make that decision? And this is where then I think, do you know what? We think that we are amazing individuals because of the titles that we keep. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a physiotherapist, I'm amazing. No. The thing that makes you amazing is those great acts of humanity. And so you take away your titles, you take away your faith, you take away the things that we think, do you know what, that really makes me?
Yeah.
And when you actually take those away and think, inside it, if you can't be kind, show humanity, do great acts of passion, then actually those titles that you hold dear mean nothing. Your faith means nothing if you can't actually then do something that's going to save somebody else's life. And I think that's what hit me when I just couldn't stop crying. Because I just thought, this woman did this for me. And she's mourning her baby, whereas I'm living my life with my son. I'm making memories with him.
But I expect that's a huge comfort to her.
I hope so. I hope it, because and the other thing I come back to is that I never spoke about Kasim's journey. I never spoke, even in our community. I would get people asking me, how's Kasim? Oh, he's all right. He's just having some tests in a hospital. Oh, how's your hospital? Oh, it's okay, Auntie. It was all right. There's this thing in our community where we don't talk about something, because you just want to not discuss it. It's private, it's personal. You don't want to air your dirty laundry in public. And there's this phrase that we have, which is embedded in me, which is like, log kya kahenge? What will people say?
Wow. Yeah.
And so when you have that embedded in you, for anything, mental health, log kya kahenge? What will people say? Your marriage is breaking down. What will people say? You're having domestic violence.
It's a
don't
real
talk
barrier
about it.
to getting support, to having discussions.
Exactly. Domestic violence. What will people say? That's the first thing your elders will tell you, and that's embedded in you. And the minute that's embedded in you, you don't ever talk about it. And then that was me.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, oh my God, and I had utter shame. Literally, I was crippled with shame, because I thought, this mother, who I don't know what her faith was, I don't know what her colour, her creed, anything about her, she had the humanity to not care about what people think, but saved my son's life when she knew she couldn't take her baby home. And she allowed me to take my baby home. And I, for F's sake, can't even talk about it.
And how is Kasim now?
He's amazing.
Yes, I've seen him on Breakfast TV.
He loves the limelight. He just loves it. He's amazing. And I think that he's given me the courage to talk about taboo stuff and to not hide away and have a voice almost in regards to bridging that gap between my community and almost like Western communities, and doing it in a culturally sensitive way, because sometimes we can be seen as quite an insular community who doesn't integrate very much. And I'm really keen to show that we are integrating and we're reaching out. And I'm really proud of my roots. I really want to show the people that actually we want to work with all the systems that are in the UK, and we're not insular at all.
So on that subject of organ donation and the issues around ethnic minorities, where can people go to get more information and support?
So the first thing is that I get that conversation started, think about it at home, because you sort of hit the nail on the head earlier. You said we don't like to talk about dying. Nobody does, but it's going to happen. And actually think about what your wishes would be, and if they are, let your family know. It's really important, because a big piece of study was done, and that showed that particularly the younger generation, they are really keen, they're open to the idea of organ donation, but the elders, who still probably are entrenched in their cultural ways or their misunderstanding, don't have that information yet because of access to internet or social media, etc. So have those conversations at home. There's a fantastic Facebook group called Share Your Wishes. I would definitely advise people to go to that. If you put that into Google, you'll find it. And also NHS blood and transplant services. That's evidence-based. There's loads of information. In spring 2020, so this year, there's going to be the opt-out law. So everybody's considered an organ donor unless they opt out. I really encourage people to please do your own research. Make an informed decision. People always think, oh, it must be because you've, I don't know, particularly liver, it must be because of lifestyle choices. Well, actually, no, anyone can need an organ at any point. Diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those conditions can lead to the fact that you need an organ at some point. So if it's not you now, it might be you 10, 15, 20 years down the line. Or if not you, then your relative. And that wait on the donor is the hardest wait.
what's 2020 got in store for you, Nighat?
So you might actually see me on TV a bit more. I'm going to do a couple of projects. I've got an upcoming episode in Food or Scare for the BBC where I talk about the effects of chili and how chilies can affect us.
Right.
And I filmed that with Chris Bavin last year.
Oh, I think I saw something on when you were at a chili farm.
Yeah,
somewhere.
I was so excited. It was so much fun. I never thought that I'd end up doing TV work. I look at a lot of these doctors on TV, so TV doctors, and I admire them, but I always used to think, oh, go and see a patient. Come into the real world.
Yeah.
And now I'm that person. I'm such a snob.
I heard another doctor talking about that anxiety on another podcast the other day about just that feeling of like, what are the other doctors going to think?
Yeah. But I come back to that, what will people say?
Yes.
Do you know what? I've given up on it. So people can say whatever they like, because when they really meet me in real life, I'm actually, I lark around and I prance around, and I try and sprinkle a little bit of goodness if I can.
Yeah. All of the resources that you've mentioned today will be on the show notes for this episode. So thank you so much for talking to me today, Nighat. We know that menopause needs so much more understanding, and it's a conversation that's really taking off, thank goodness. But the issues we've discussed today around ethnic minority groups really need to be opened up for discussion, and of course your continued work is invaluable. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real honour and a real joy.
Made by darkhorsedigital.co.uk. Shooting, live streaming and podcast production.
Hello, this is Rich Wilson, host of the podcast Insane in the Membrane, where we talk to funny and interesting people about men's mental health. People like James Acaster.
Because we won't talk about emotions because we think that's bad. We won't talk about feelings because that's bad. So they've had to rebrand it and go, it's mental health. Go, mental. Our brains are saying, I'm pretty clever. Okay, I'll get into my mental. I like puzzles.
And Rob Beckett.
I've never even done a school play. I did some open mic gigs. Did the Edinburgh Fringe, somehow got on the telly, and I'm on the other side of the world in the jungle doing nights, following Ant and Dec.
And David Baddiel.
Mum comes up to me and says, I'm starting this charity and it's for men and mental health in men, and would you like to be the patron of it? And my first thought was, so I come to this place every day. If I say no, she's going to be looking at me every day like, you cunt, you uncaring, pretending to be interested in mental health cunt.
Search Insane in the Membrane from wherever you get your podcasts. Brand new